facility, as well as banking products and services to Brazos Valley citizens.
Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. When Gerald McCaskill boarded the battleship USS Tennessee in June of 1944, it was the first ship that he had ever seen. He would see plenty of it over the next 15 months, including combat action throughout World War II's Pacific Theater. The Tennessee had already seen plenty of warfare, including on 7 December 1941, docked at Pearl Harbor alongside the ill-fated West Virginia and Arizona on that day that will live in infamy. Over his time on the Tennessee, its travels took it to Saipan, Guam, Tinian, Guadalcanal, Palau, the Philippines, back to Pearl Harbor, Saipan, and within a mile of the beaches of Iwo Jima for that Marine invasion to Mount Suribachi. On to Okinawa and eventually to Japan. The Tennessee was badly damaged at least twice after the attack on Pearl Harbor, an attack at Tinian, later a suicide attack to the quarterdeck. Gerald McCaskill has a story to tell, and we are proud to welcome him to Veterans of the Valley. Gerald, it is an honor to have you here on Veterans of the Valley, and again, thank you for your service. I want to move you right out of high school. You went to Centerville High School, and it was either stay and do farming with your dad, get a job, or do what the inevitable was, and that was go into the service. You knew you were going to get drafted, so you joined the Navy. Talk about that, and you had a very quick training before you went on to the Pacific.
Yeah, I did. I had just a menial job after I got out of high school with a geophysical crew, and knew that eventually I would be drafted. And at that time, you could make a choice as to what branch of the service you wanted to be in, and I kind of thought maybe the Navy might be okay because, you know, it was dry and not much mud on the ship and so forth. But anyway, I went in March 14, I believe, of 1944, and was sent to San Diego, California, for my training. And normally you have about 3 months of boot camp. Well, we had 6 weeks. Right. I never knew why, except we had, after our boot camp, we had 1 week of work detail, which was entailed stenciling clothes for the new recruits. And of course, we, having been in 6 weeks, we thought we were pretty big fellas because we did a lot of shouting at them and so forth. But anyway, after that, we boarded a troop transport and went to Hawaii. And we were aboard, I don't remember the name of the old troop transport, but once we got to Hawaii, they mustered us around on the island, and we were there about 3 or 4 days before they made assignments. And there was quite a few sailors in the group, and most of them were all brand new recruits. So they divided them up among the ships that needed help, and it so happened that I got the Tennessee, which as it turned out, I was happy that I did. But
what was your job?
Well, during battle, I was in damage control, which was a matter of when we had damage to the ship, any of the lines or decking or whatever, we tried to stop the flow of water or oil or whatever was in the compartment until they could get some of the specialists to come and repair it. And I remember, of course, Saipan was where we got hit, and one of the shells hit one of their 5-inch batteries and killed everybody in it. And then another one hit just above the waterline, and one hit on the quarterdeck above our compartment where our battle station was. And it just so happened that it hit the spud locker
Where the potatoes
where
were
they
kept.
stored the potatoes, and also broke a salt water line. And our compartment was filling up pretty fast with potatoes and water. So we got the water stopped, and then, of course, then our duty was pretty much over as far as that was concerned. And nobody in our compartment was hurt or injured anyway in that campaign. But I think we lost 7 died and about 25 or 6 injured.
So the ones that died were the ones that were around that 5-inch.
In that 5-inch mount.
In that 5-inch mount.
A gun, yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
excuse me, I'm not sure how many people, what the complement was a 5-inch, but anyway, they were killed instantly, and the mount was on fire. And
About how many sailors were on the Tennessee at this time?
we had about almost 2,000.
Wow.
That's officers, men, and cooks. And
So it's like a small town. That's what
yes,
it
it
is.
was,
Yeah.
and we had barber shop, and of course, and which they didn't have to be specialists to be barbers in the Navy, but we had a commissary where you could requisition clothes or supplies or whatever, and get. Sometimes they'd have candy, and we had a ice cream maker that you could get a little ice cream occasionally, but most generally you just took the chow that they gave you. And when I first went aboard, and before they assigned me to a division or a group, I was just hanging loose, and I had to sleep in my hammock in the mess hall, which wasn't a great deal of fun, but we got to wake up early because the cooks would come in and they'd start hollering at you or turn over your hammock. And after that, I got assigned to the R Division, which was one of the biggest groups of men on the ship. And like I say, they had ship fitters and pipe fitters and carpenters and metal workers, and we even had the band was in our division.
Wow.
Had
Wow.
a pretty good little band. And,
You'd only been in the Navy 3 months when
That's
this
right.
first attack
That's right.
happened. You'd been on the ship probably less than a month, I guess.
That's right.
What did you think? I mean, had you envisioned that the action was going to start up that quick?
Well, no. Before we left Pearl Harbor to go to the Marianas, a friend of mine from New York and I were just hanging out, and we didn't know they were going to have gunnery practice. But all of a sudden, those 14-inch guns started firing, and we didn't know what to do, except we had trying to find a place to go. And but it was overwhelming for me, not having had any experience, or not actually knowing anything about what was going on as far as being aboard a ship.
Right, right. You told me about later on, as we move on, you told me about a situation involving Admiral Halsey being used as a decoy.
Well, that was in the Philippines.
Later on in the Philippines, right?
Yeah, we had already, landed, and the ships were patrolling the Philippines and the East China Sea. And the 7th Division, which was what we were in, had 6 old battleships, and the second division, second fleet, had all the new ones. You know, they were swifter and faster and had bigger guns, and that was Halsey's command.
Right.
Well, there was, as I understand it from reading now, there was a kind of a build-up of the Japanese fleet to come back to the Philippines and retake what they had lost. And there was rumor, I assume, that they got intelligence that the fleet was north. And so Halsey wanted to score a big hit, and he took all the big ships, the new ships, and the carriers and so forth, and headed north to intercept them, which left us there at the Philippines.
Right.
Well, while that was exactly what the Japanese wanted to do, they wanted to get the Halsey out of the way, and we were under the command of Ollendorf, Admiral Ollendorf. And we got, I assume we had intelligence that told us that the fleet, Japanese fleet, was coming through Surigao Straits. And so he or somebody designed a plan whereby the ship would intercept these Japanese fleet coming in this narrow strait. And the first group that attacked them was the PT boats. And then they come on down, and the destroyers started peppering them. And by then, our ships, the battleships, were stationed crossways so that we could fire all of our guns. The Japanese coming straight ahead could only fire their forward guns. So we had them at a disadvantage. And it didn't take too long for them to turn tail and get out of there. Well, of course, when they turned, we got after them again pretty good. But I think the California was one of our ships. I don't think she got a shot off.
Is that right?
No, I don't know that. But
we've got a picture coming up, as a matter of fact, that's going to show both the Tennessee and the California in just a minute. I want to fast forward here a little bit. The battleship Tennessee had to go back to Seattle for its major repairs after the attack, and you got to go home for what you hoped had been 30 days, but it turned out not to be 30 days. You were called back earlier, but you were able to make your way back to Centerville, right?
Well, we did. Yeah, we moved into, or we came to Bremerton, Washington, which is across the bay from Seattle, and they gave 2 leaves. We were there to be there 60 days, and they issued orders for 2 leave groups, and of course, not having had much time in the Navy, I was able to secure one of the last leaves.
So you got to go home for 30 days.
I got to go home for 30 days.
But it wasn't quite 30 days, and you were called back.
They wired us, and of course, I lived way out in the country. And they wired Centerville. Right. And I had an uncle living there, and he got the telegram and brought it out to us. And so I headed back.
Headed back on the Tennessee to the Philippines, patrolling the East China Sea, and then eventually to Iwo Jima.
Iwo Jima.
To tell us a little bit about the Tennessee's role in the attack on Iwo Jima. Obviously, you were offshore and you were providing cover for the Marines, right?
Well, that's true. And that was our basic program in any of the invasions. Normally, we went in about 5 days in advance of the landings to fire, and they had spotter planes that would detect and direct fire into the gun mounts and so forth. And so we would stand off. We would usually we'd fire for an hour from the starboard side, then we'd swing around and fire from the port side, and we had two crews, the port and starboard crew, and they'd get to rest a little while. But
I want to go ahead and go to the pictures now because I wanted to just mention your service at Iwo Jima because we have some photographs. So let's go ahead and go to those. About how old were you in this picture?
I was 18.
18. So this is at
by the time I
start of your, well, actually you finished high school at 16, so you'd been in the service a while, right?
Well, I on my before my 18th birthday, I had been at Saipan, Guam, Tinian, Palau, Philippines, and the Battle of Surigao Strait.
So you were an experienced sailor here.
Yeah, and you know, you come back, you got a ribbon with all the damn stars on it. And people say, "What's the matter with you, boy?"
And you were proud to explain what those were all about. There's the Tennessee right there. Now this is a photograph taken in July of or actually this was off Port Angeles, Washington.
Yeah.
Before you had boarded there. This is sort of the early version before Pearl Harbor, but I just thought that was an excellent photograph that was taken from a book that you have called USS Tennessee in World War II by Clifton Simmons. And the photographs you're about to see are all coming from that book. This is another photograph, sort of up close, the casemate deck and the 3-inch guns. But that's sort of an early version. It didn't look quite like that, right? The 5-inch guns, excuse me.
Well, it did not look like that when I went aboard.
Right.
It had more enclosed superstructure.
But that was early on.
Yeah.
Now we're going to move to
Pearl Harbor.
Right. This is December 10th, 3 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And what you're seeing there is the Tennessee right beside the remains, the sunken West Virginia. And this photo was taken from the hull of the Oklahoma. So, and again, this was before you had boarded, but this is the battleship that you would board and spend 15 months on.
Yeah, right.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. This is fresh from the rebuild after Pearl Harbor.
Well, if you notice, Tom, on about midway down, there's some what we call blisters. Those were added.
Right, right. Afterwards, it's amazing. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, it was up and going and repaired in about 3 months' time, or a little less than 3 months' time. This next photograph is it's a fascinating photograph. June 18th, 1944. You are now on the ship under fire at Saipan.
Right.
And this is the photograph I was referring to. I think this is the Tennessee in the foreground, and in the background on the right, that's the California.
California and Tennessee were sister ships.
I see, in the same fleet.
They were laid down at about the same time. I think they were completed in 1920. I'm not sure.
This is Admiral Nimitz, and this was on 17 October 1944, and I bet you can recall when he came on board to address the...
Yeah, in fact, the captain, that's our captain on the left. I don't recognize those other guys,
but that was I bet that was quite a time when the when the leader was there, the main man.
You really didn't particularly want to have the admiral on your ship because you had to toe the mark a little.
Oh, I bet you do. A lot of scrubbing.
We were flagship.
Yeah.
Several times.
Yeah. A lot of cleanup before he came on.
Yeah, and you know, of course, most of those guys were just regular people.
Exactly.
Folks and.
Exactly. This is at Iwo Jima. The date is 19 February 1945, as I guess the Tennessee is positioning itself.
Yeah,
for the attack.
Well, you can see that those are probably LCTs or going in, I would guess.
We've had veterans that were actually, Ed Iyer is a veteran who actually was a Marine that was there at D-Day at Iwo Jima, and he remembers looking out onto the waters and said, I've never seen so many crafts in his whole life, so many ships and boats and cruisers and destroyers, and the Tennessee was one of them.
Yep.
This photograph and the next one are fascinating. We have not talked yet about this. We will. In 1945, the next major attack to the Tennessee was a suicide plane that found its mark. And these first two photographs on the left or the right, this is just seconds before the suicide plane hit at the quarterdeck. And that's the moment of impact right there of the suicide plane hitting the Tennessee. And in a moment, we're going to get you to talk about that, because this came in April the 12th, 1945. And those pictures were actually still shots taken from a film. And finally, talk about, you're in the bottom left, and talk about this picture. And
Well, these were some guys that I worked with in the first lieutenant's office and the damage control group. The kid on the right was from Nacogdoches. His name was Cyril Roberts. And Don Hampton on the left back, and Joe Martinez. He was from New Orleans.
right.
And I never heard from any of them afterward. I know that Martinez is dead, and I would guess that Hampton, probably, he was older.
Right.
But the guy from Nacogdoches, I finally tracked him down.
Really? Really?
But he had multiple strokes, and
I see.
I talked to his wife and wrote him a letter and sent him this picture. And she said, well, he smiled.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. That's great. Matter of fact, you just returned from a reunion in South Dakota that I know that you were very excited about. You have a reunion every year, and
Yeah,
folks
we
get
do.
together.
We
You had about 85, including spouses, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And South Dakota doesn't seem like the appropriate place to have a ship reunion, but what they try to do is pass it around to different parts of the country so that guys don't have to travel as far every time.
Right.
Next year it's in Knoxville, Tennessee.
I see.
And
We saw the photographs, and I want you to talk about April the 12th, 1945, which also coincidentally happened to be the day that FDR died.
that's correct.
Talk about.
sad day.
We just have about 5 minutes left, but I want you to talk about that attack and how you all survived it, because not everybody did.
Well, no, the planes, of course, came in as from off the starboard bow, the one that hit us, and I think we shot down 4 or 5 before they got that close. But this one made it in, and he hit the yard arm off the bridge, and then tumbled down and hit several of the open gun mounts, and killed 26, I think, that day, and injured maybe 100, 120 people. But had a bomb, and it hit on the quarterdeck just above our compartment. So we had another, didn't have any potatoes, but we had a lot of damage. We had, as I remember, we had some oil lines, and we also had the water lines that we had to take care of. And nobody in our compartment was hit again, so we were fortunate, very fortunate.
You were discharged in April of 1946. We are running out of time, so we're going to have to move forward, but you did decide to come back rather than go to work at the farm. Came back and you went to Texas A&M, and it was kind of tough for you because you hadn't been to school for 4 years, and it was kind of tough going, but you all decided rather than go back to the farm to stick with it, and you graduated in 4 years from Texas A&M.
Well, we did, because I graduated in 4 years because I had to take 18 hours per semester to get all the credits in, because my time, a GI Bill would have run out.
Right.
And I didn't have any money to go. So, yeah, to me, the GI Bill was one of the best things that they ever
You graduated
did
from graduated from A&M in 1950, and that's the same year that you married Shirley.
I sure did.
And
I lucked out there.
You lucked out there, indeed. And And then your career took you to West Texas, to the Panhandle, to Lubbock, and eventually to Andrews, where you were in the banking business for some 30-something years.
Right.
Where you were kind of Mr. Andrews, I get the idea, the president of the Chamber of Commerce. And
you know, if you're in a small town and can't say no, you get to do a lot of things. But it did take up a lot of time, but I enjoyed it.
right,
Andrews was probably one of the best small towns that we ever lived in. Hereford, we lived in Hereford for
Right.
a while, and it was a good town.
right.
So,
Eventually, you retired and you came back to the area, back to the Leon area. But then, because of health problems, because of heart problems, you wanted to get near some good doctors, and that's sort of what brought you back to the town of your alma mater, to
well, that
College Station.
and we have a place
Right.
up in
Up in
Leon
Leon.
County that we needed to look after. And at the time, you know, we had one of our sons lived in the Woodlands.
Right.
One lived in Georgetown, and the daughter lived in Denver, and of course that was out of the picture. So this was near, and so we felt comfortable here. And this is another. We've never lived in a place we didn't like. We've
Indeed.
always enjoyed everywhere we've ever lived, and College Station is a fine town.
Indeed it is. And we're glad to have you. You and Shirley have 7 grandkids and 1 great grandchild.
One great.
And I know that you're proud of them, and they're all proud of you.
Yep.
Indeed. We're just about out of time, but I want to thank you very, very much for your service. The time goes very, very quickly, but I want to thank you for your service and in your retirement in College Station. I know you and Shirley are enjoying it.
Thank you. We are. We've done a lot of traveling.
Indeed. And you plan to continue to do traveling, I hope.
Yeah, as long as we can stay vertical. We're going to
That's the idea.
hang
Right.
in there.
Thank you, Gerald. Thank you for your
Thank you
service,
very
and thank
much.
you for being with
Appreciate
us. The stick-with-it attitude that Gerald McCaskill used to get through Texas A&M was certainly acquired by his brave service aboard the USS Tennessee from June of '44 to September of '45. BB-43, the Tennessee, was certainly a proud ship that served from Pearl Harbor and beyond, and Gerald McCaskill was later one of its proud sailors. We salute Gerald McCaskill for his World War II service. Please join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.